The seat that started a war. A man in a $3,000 suit. A woman who thought she owned the world. And 30 seconds that changed everything. She looked at him like he didn't belong, like first class was a country with a border she controlled. In front of a full cabin, she said the words out loud. What she didn't know was that the man standing quietly in the aisle held the power to bring her entire empire to its knees. This is the story of what happened when she picked the wrong seat and the wrong man to humiliate. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. The terminal at O'Hare was already running 40 minutes behind when Jalen Cross stepped through the jetway door, briefcase in his left hand, boarding pass in his right. The kind of quiet focus in his eyes that only came from a man who had learned, the hard way, over many years, that composure was the most powerful thing he owned. He was 30 years old, he was black. He was wearing a charcoal wool suit that his assistant had picked up from the cleaners the morning before, pressed so clean the lapels caught the cabin light like something intentional. His shoes were a pair of dark Oxfords, simple and polished, the kind of shoes a man bought once and kept for a decade. The briefcase was soft leather, initialed, a gift from his daughter on his 28th birthday. She'd been 6 years old, and she'd drawn his initials on a piece of paper and handed it to him solemnly, the way children do when they want you to know they see you. He thought about her now as he stepped into the first-class cabin of United Flight 447, Chicago to San Francisco, scheduled departure 11:10 a.m. Currently running behind because a storm front had pushed every inbound connection into a tight, anxious cluster at the gate. He had a board meeting in San Francisco at 9 the following morning. He had a call with his legal team at 6 tonight. He had a custody exchange on Sunday, which meant he had approximately 41 hours to do everything and then get back to the only person whose timeline actually mattered. His seat was 2A window. He had chosen it himself 3 weeks ago when the calendar invite first appeared. He liked the window on morning flights, liked watching the city shrink beneath him, liked the way it reminded him how large the world was and how small most problems turned out to be from a sufficient altitude. He stepped past 1A, past 1B, and stopped. Seat 2A was occupied. She was young, mid-20s, he guessed, though there was something in the way she held herself that was ageless in the particular way of people who had never needed to hustle. She was blonde, sharp-featured, wearing a cream-colored blazer over a silk blouse, her legs crossed in a posture so deliberate it bordered on architectural. One hand held a phone at a tilt, the screen catching the light. The other rested on the armrest with the relaxed authority of a woman who had never once in her life been asked to move. She did not look up. Jalen glanced at his boarding pass. 2A. He looked at the seat number mounted above the window. 2A. He set his briefcase gently in the overhead bin, carefully, the way you do when you've learned not to give people reasons to escalate, and then turned back to the woman in his seat. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was measured, unhurried, the product of years of conference rooms and investor calls and every situation where the wrong tone could end something before it started. "I think you might be in my seat." She didn't look up immediately. She finished whatever she was typing, then tilted her head in his direction with the slow, reptilian patience of someone who found the interruption mildly amusing. Her eyes moved over him. It was not a scan. It was an assessment, the kind of look that wasn't reading a person so much as categorizing them, the way you'd categorize something you found unexpectedly in a drawer. "I don't think so," she said. Her voice was airy, self-possessed, pitched just loud enough for the seats around them to hear without being loud enough to seem like she was performing for them. She was, of course, but she was good at it. "I'm in 2A, Jalen said. He held out his boarding pass, not aggressively, just factually, the way you'd show someone a map. "I have it right here." She looked at the boarding pass the way people look at a parking ticket they intend to contest. "Seats like this," she said, and her voice shifted just slightly, not louder, but more deliberate, each word acquiring a kind of slow, enunciated weight, "aren't really for people like you." The cabin went quiet. Not suddenly, not with a gasp. It went quiet the way air goes out of a room when something irreversible has been said. A slow, collective intake of breath. Phones lowering. Conversation stopping mid-sentence. The specific silence of people who have just witnessed something and are deciding whether they've actually heard what they think they heard. Jalen didn't move. He stood in the aisle, his boarding pass still in his right hand, and he looked at the woman in his seat, and he felt a very specific thing, not rage, because rage was a luxury he'd learned he couldn't afford in moments like this. What he felt was something colder and more precise than rage. Something that lived in the part of him that had been built in rooms where he was always the only one, in pitches where he had to be twice as prepared, in deals where the other party's skepticism had nothing to do with his numbers. He recognized this moment. He had been here before, in different forms, in different rooms, wearing different clothes. He knew exactly what it was. "My name is on the manifest," he said quietly. "I'd like my seat." She finally lowered her phone all the way and looked at him with a smile that didn't reach anything behind her eyes. "Why don't you take 2B?" she said. "I'm sure it's perfectly adequate." "2B is the middle seat," Jalen said. "Then it suits you perfectly," she said, and turned back to her phone. For a long moment, Jalen simply stood there. He was aware of the camera phones. He had been aware of them from the second she said the sentence, had clocked the subtle movement in his peripheral vision, the way hands shifted toward pockets and jacket seams, the instinctive documentary impulse that 21st century human beings had developed as a replacement for actually intervening. He knew some of those cameras would be used to help him. He also knew some of them could be used against him, and that the difference would depend entirely on what happened in the next 60 seconds. He pressed the call button above his seat. It took 45 seconds for the flight attendant to appear from the galley. A young woman in her late 20s, dark hair, an ID badge that read Carrie, a smile that faltered the moment she registered the geometry of the situation. "Hi," Jalen said, and his voice was so calm it almost sounded bored. "I'm Jalen Cross. I'm booked in 2A. Could you confirm that on the manifest?" Carrie looked at him. She looked at the woman in the seat. She looked at Jalen's boarding pass, which he was still holding, and something moved across her face. The very specific expression of a person who has understood everything about a situation and is trying to calculate the least damaging way to navigate it. "Of course," she said. "One moment." She disappeared toward the front of the plane. The woman in the seat had not looked up from her phone during any of this. She was either genuinely unconcerned or performing unconcern with professional precision, and at this point the distinction was academic. "You can sit down," she said without lifting her eyes. "All this theater is unnecessary." "I'd prefer to stand until this is sorted," Jalen said. "Suit yourself." She tilted her phone slightly. "You're making it weird." I'm standing in the aisle next to the seat I paid for," Jalen said. "You're the one who's making something." She looked up at that. There was a flicker, quick, almost imperceptible, of something in her expression that wasn't amusement. Then it was gone, smoothed back into the mask. "I know who you are," she said quietly, and now her voice had dropped to something almost conversational, the performance gone for a fraction of a second. "I know exactly who you are, and I promise you, you don't want this." Jalen looked at her steadily. "I just want my seat." Carrie returned. She had a tablet in her hand and a supervisor behind her. A trim man in his 40s, silver tie, the particular expression of airline management professionals who have learned to move through conflict with the diplomatic neutrality of UN observers. "Mr. Cross," Carrie said, and there was relief in her voice, the relief of someone who had hoped the manifest would be ambiguous and found that it was absolutely not. "You are confirmed in seat 2A. Your booking has been in the system since—" "I'm sorry," the woman in the seat interrupted, and her voice had changed completely. It was louder now, sharper. The performance had upgraded itself, moved from private theater to something intended for a much larger audience. "Are you actually standing there telling me this man has a legitimate first-class ticket?" "Yes, ma'am," Carrie said carefully. "He does." "I find that very hard to believe." She looked around the cabin, not nervously, but strategically, like a general assessing which hills were worth taking. "I would like to see an original ticket, not a printed copy. I've heard about people scanning the zones and—" "Ma'am," the supervisor said, and his voice had the exhausted patience of a man who had handled 1,000 variations of this exact situation. "Mr. Cross has a confirmed ticket in seat 2A. I'd need to ask you to—" "I don't think you understand who I am," she said. The supervisor paused. "I'm sure. My name is Sloan Whitaker." She said it the way certain people say their names. Not as an introduction, but as a declaration, as if the name itself was a credential that should visibly alter the behavior of anyone who heard it. My family has a partnership with this airline that goes back 22 years. I personally know the CEO. I have flown first class on this carrier more times than you've probably had performance reviews, and I am telling you that something about this situation is not right. The cabin was very quiet. Jalen had still not raised his voice. He was standing in the aisle with his hands loose at his sides, his boarding pass held between two fingers, watching Sloane Whitaker perform for the jury of 30-some passengers who were no longer pretending not to watch. "Ma'am," the supervisor said again, with somewhat less patience. "The manifest is, I want security," Sloane said. "I want to file a formal complaint, and I want this man—" She gestured at Jalen with the hand that held her phone, the kind of gesture that was careless enough to be dismissive and deliberate enough to be demeaning. "I want him questioned before this flight departs, because I don't believe this ticket is legitimate, and I won't sit next to someone who may have compromised this cabin's security." The word security landed like a lit match in dry paper. Phones lifted again, more of them this time. Jalen breathed in slowly through his nose. He felt the familiar calculation happening behind his eyes. The arithmetic of being a black man in a public space when someone had decided to use a word like security, the way that single word had the power to transform a legitimate dispute about a seat assignment into something with an entirely different and far more dangerous texture. He thought about his daughter. He thought about Sunday. He thought about the board meeting tomorrow morning and the 6 o'clock call, and the 41 hours that had just gotten considerably more complicated. And he stood there, steady, in the aisle of a delayed flight to San Francisco, and he waited. Security arrived in the form of 2 airport officers, both white, both broad-shouldered, both carrying the particular aura of people who had been summoned to a situation and were still in the process of determining what the situation actually was. The taller one looked at Jalen, then at the supervisor, then at Sloane, then back at Jalen. "Sir," he said to Jalen, "can I see your boarding pass and ID?" "Of course." Jalen produced both, his Illinois driver's license and the boarding pass, with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who had learned that in situations like this, no gesture should be ambiguous. He handed them over calmly. The officer examined them. He looked at the manifest on Carrie's tablet. He looked at the boarding pass again. "This is definitely your seat," the officer said, with the flat, factual certainty of someone who has resolved a factual question. "I know," Jalen said. Sloane made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff, something between the two. "This is incredible. You're actually going to let him—" "Ma'am," the second officer said, turning to her, "could I see your boarding pass?" For the first time, Sloane Whitaker's composure showed something like weather, a front passing through. Brief, quickly suppressed, but visible. "I don't have it on me," she said. "It's in my bag. Could you get it, please?" She reached into a cream-colored bag, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly rent, and produced a boarding pass with the performance of someone who expected the act of producing a document to itself be insulting. The officer looked at it. "Ma'am," he said, "this is 3A. Silence. She stopped. "That's a misprint. It says 3A. "The gate agent put me here," she said, and her voice had shifted again. Less commanding now, more brittle, the edges showing. "He told me 2A was open, that the passenger had been rerouted." "No gate agent told you that," Carrie said, and there was something in her voice that had changed, something that had passed through diplomatic neutrality and emerged on the other side with a quiet, controlled clarity. "I was at the gate the entire time. No one rerouted Mr. Cross." The cabin had now reached the particular quality of silence that precedes something. Everyone was watching. Phones were recording. The supervisor was standing with his hands clasped in front of him, looking at Sloane Whitaker with the expression of a man who has understood that whatever relationship may have existed between this woman and the airline's upper management, it was not going to be his problem to manage. Sloane looked at Jalen. Something moved through her face, a recalculation, something being reassessed and repackaged behind her eyes. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said to the airline supervisor. "The actual supervisor, not this." She made a gesture that encompassed the supervisor, the officers, and the general situation with a kind of exhausted contempt. "I am the senior supervisor on this flight," the man said. "Then I'd like to speak to someone in operations." "Ma'am, the flight is already delayed." "I don't care about the delay." She turned back to Jalen, and now her voice dropped again, back into that private register. The one that wasn't performing for the cabin, the one that was talking to him specifically, and the sound of it made something in Jalen's chest go very still. "You really want to do this?" she said quietly. "You think you can stand here and embarrass me and walk away from that?" Jalen looked at her for a long moment. "I just want my seat," he said again. "That's all I've ever wanted." Sloan Whitaker held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she stood up. Slowly, the way people stand up when they want standing up to feel like a threat. And she moved into the aisle. She did not move all the way. She stood with her legs arranged just slightly wider than necessary, not touching him, never touching him, careful to the point of deliberateness about that, but filling the space in a way that meant Jalen, in order to reach 2A, would have to either ask her to move further or maneuver around her body in a way that could be framed, on camera, in a completely different context. It was elegant, in a terrible way. A trap built in a few square feet of airplane aisle, baited with physical proximity and the certainty that whatever happened next could be edited. Jalen saw it immediately. He turned sideways. He moved with deliberate, almost theatrical care, angling himself so that there was maximum visible distance between his body and hers. His briefcase held against his chest, each step slow and documented. He reached 2A. He sat down. He placed his briefcase beneath the seat in front of him. He buckled his seatbelt. He folded his hands in his lap. He did not look at Sloan Whitaker as she walked back to 3A with the unhurried pace of someone who had decided that losing the battle was not the same as losing the war. The cabin began to decompress. Slowly, conversations resuming, phones lowering, the collective tension unwinding into the ordinary low-grade stress of a delayed flight. Carrie caught Jalen's eye and gave him the smallest nod, the kind of nod that contained an entire conversation in a single gesture. Jalen nodded back. He looked out the window. The tarmac was gray and wet, runways stretching toward a flat horizon under a November sky that couldn't decide between cloud and fog. Ground crews moved between the planes in their orange vests, doing the invisible, essential work that kept the world moving. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His executive assistant, Danielle, flight tracker, shows you're delayed 35 minutes. Board meeting still on. Marcus will open if you're more than 20 minutes late. Also, are you okay? I saw something tagged on Twitter. He looked at the message for a moment. Then he typed back, "I'm fine. I'll be there. Tell Marcus I'll open myself." He put the phone face down on his knee. He looked out the window again. The engines were beginning to build, slow and distant at first, then growing into that particular resonant roar that was both terrifying and reassuring. The sound of physics working exactly as promised, of lift being generated by math and metal and human certainty, of something heavier than air deciding, against all reasonable expectation, to rise. Jalen Cross thought about his daughter. He thought about the way she'd looked last Sunday morning, sitting at the kitchen table in her pajamas with a bowl of cereal and a book, her braids undone. The apartment quiet around her, the particular golden light of a Chicago autumn coming through the window at an angle that made everything look important. He thought about what he'd had to build to give her that table, that morning, that light. And he thought about what he was not willing to let anyone take. The plane began to move. Somewhere in the rows behind him, in 3A, Sloan Whitaker was typing on her phone with the focused energy of a person who had decided that the next move would be made on her terms. She didn't know yet what was coming. She didn't know about the phone call Jalen had taken at the gate, the one that had lasted 11 minutes, the one that had ended with him saying quietly and finally, "Do it," effective immediately. She didn't know about the message that had gone out from Crossgate Innovation's legal department at 10:53 a.m., 12 minutes before boarding, the message that had landed in 7 inboxes across 4 financial institutions and 2 law firms, the message that had set in motion something that would reach her world before this plane landed in San Francisco. She thought she knew what this was. She thought she understood the shape of what she was dealing with. She was wrong in almost every dimension, but that was still ahead. For now, there was only the plane lifting from the runway, Chicago falling away beneath them, and the long, quiet arc of a flight crossing the country under a winter sky. Two people heading toward the same city, carrying very different ideas about what was going to happen when they arrived. Outside the window, the clouds closed over the city like a curtain, and there was nothing below them now but white. Jalen Cross opened his briefcase. He had work to do. The clouds outside the window were the particular shade of white that made the world below feel theoretical, like Chicago had been a hypothesis, and San Francisco was something you had to prove from scratch. Jalen had been flying long enough to know that the first hour of a cross-country flight had its own specific texture. The gradual settling of the cabin, the ritual of meal service, the slow, communal decision people made to stop being strangers in crisis and become strangers in transit. It usually happened around 30,000 feet, somewhere over Iowa, when the turbulence smoothed out and everyone quietly agreed to let the tension go. It wasn't happening on this flight. He could feel it, the way you feel a current in still water, not visible, not loud, but present in the resistance. The passengers around him had the careful, averted quality of people who had witnessed something and hadn't yet decided what to do with what they'd seen. The woman in 1B, 50s, reading glasses, a paperback she hadn't turned a page of since takeoff, glanced at him every 4 minutes with an expression that lived somewhere between sympathy and the anxiety of someone who hoped the sympathy wasn't visible. The man across the aisle in 2B had put in earbuds but hadn't started anything playing. Jalen could tell because the man's eyes were too focused, too fixed on the seat back in front of him, the concentrated stillness of someone who was listening rather than tuning out. Jalen opened his briefcase and took out a legal pad. Old habit, his thinking still happened better on paper than on screens, a quirk his tech staff found both endearing and slightly alarming given that he ran a company whose entire infrastructure existed in the cloud. He uncapped a pen and wrote 3 words at the top of the page. He stared at them. Then he put the pen down, because there was something happening 2 rows behind him that his peripheral awareness had been tracking for the last several minutes, and he needed to decide whether to keep ignoring it. Sloane Whitaker was on the phone. She wasn't speaking loudly. She was too controlled for that, too aware of how sound traveled in a pressurized cabin. But she was speaking with the particular intensity of someone having a conversation they believed was private and wasn't. He caught fragments, phrases, the tone more than the words. He heard his name twice. He heard the word unacceptable, delivered with a precision that suggested it was doing heavy structural work in whatever she was building on the other end of the line. He capped his pen. He looked out the window. Iowa, he thought. The flatlands. The places where the ground was so level you could see weather coming from 40 miles away, which was either a gift or a curse depending on what the weather was. His phone buzzed again. He turned it over. It was Marcus Webb, his COO, and more to the point, the person who had been running Crossgate Innovations' day-to-day operations for the past 2 years, with the competence and ferocity of a man who genuinely believed that excellence was a moral position. Jalen, I need you to call me. I've seen the Twitter clips. 3 of them, different angles. They're going around fast. Legal is already on it, but you need to hear what I'm looking at before we land. Call when you can. Jalen read the message twice. Then he put his earbuds in, opened the airline's Wi-Fi connection. $18.99 for the flight, a price that had always struck him as philosophically appropriate for the cost of staying connected to a world that didn't stop moving while you were in the air. And he called Marcus. It rang once. Marcus picked up before the second ring, which meant he'd been holding the phone. Talk to me, Jalen said. Okay. Marcus was in San Francisco already. He'd flown out the night before, the advance man, the prep work. His voice had the clipped, efficient quality it got when he was managing multiple things at once and had made peace with the chaos. So there are currently 4 videos circulating on Twitter and TikTok. 2 of them are from inside the cabin, one from a guy in 4A, one from someone who was filming from across the aisle. The other 2 are from the gate area, someone who caught the tail end of the security arrival on their phone through the window. How bad? Jalen said. Depends entirely on the framing, Marcus said. The raw footage, what I've actually watched frame by frame, it tells the story. You standing there with your boarding pass, her sitting in your seat, the whole thing. It's clear. But one of the clips that's getting the most traction is edited. Someone cut it. I don't know if it's her or someone she has on this, but it starts right at the moment the security officers arrived. It cuts everything before that. So if you're watching that version, it looks like I caused an incident, Jalen said. Like you escalated something. Yeah. A pause. The caption is aggressive executive throws fit in first class, delays flight. It's got 60,000 views in the last hour. Jalen breathed slowly and evenly, the way his therapist had taught him 6 years ago, when his divorce was in progress and Crossgate was 18 months old and he was running on 4 hours of sleep, and the specific brand of anxiety that comes from loving someone and losing them at the same time. "What's our legal team saying?" he said. "Rachel is on it. She's been on it since you were still taxiing. She's already sent preservation notices to the airline for their internal footage and has 2 of her people reaching out to the Twitter users who posted the unedited clips to secure originals before anything gets deleted." "Good. She also wants to talk to you directly. Tonight." "I know." Jalen glanced toward the back of the plane, not at Sloan specifically, just toward that section of the cabin, reflexively. "What about the contract termination? Any response yet?" 7 calls to the Crossgate main line since 10:30 this morning, Marcus said. 3 to my direct number, 2 to yours. None of them identified themselves in the voicemails, but the area codes trace back to 2 of the financial institutions in Whitaker's network. "How long until the market responds?" "It's already responding. Crossgate stock is up because the street is reading the termination as a strategic pivot. The institutions of the Whitaker network are down a combined 4% since the news went out. It's still early. Markets move slow on contract news. They're still trying to figure out what it means." "They'll figure it out fast when she lands," Jalen said. "Yeah." Marcus paused. "Are you okay?" "Actually, okay." Jalen looked out the window. The flatlands below were impossibly even, a geometry that existed nowhere else in the world. Squares and rectangles of brown and gray, the whole country laid out in a grid, as if someone had once decided that order was possible and meant it. "I'm fine," he said. "I know what that means when you say it like that." "Then you know I'm fine," Jalen said. "I'll call Rachel when we land. Make sure the room is set up for the board meeting. I want full deck, not the abbreviated version." "And Marcus," "Yeah?" "Pull everything we have on Sloan Whitaker and her family's dealings with United Continental in the past 5 years. Every contract, every amendment, every communication we can legitimately access. I want to understand the shape of what I'm dealing with." A brief silence. "That's already in progress," Marcus said, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had anticipated the instruction. "Good," Jalen said again. He ended the call. He took out one earbud and sat with the other still in. A posture that split the difference between available and occupied, a skill he'd developed at conferences. Looking approachable enough that important people would stop, inaccessible enough that unimportant conversations didn't start. The flight attendant appeared beside him. Carrie, the same one from before, the one who had confirmed his seat with that particular relief in her voice. "Mr. Cross," she said quietly, "can I get you something? We have—" "Just water," he said. "Thank you." She nodded. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. The specific hesitation of someone who wants to say something and is weighing whether it's appropriate. "For what it's worth," she said very quietly, "I'm sorry about what happened. The whole thing. It shouldn't—" She stopped, started again. "It shouldn't have gone the way it did." Jalen looked at her. There was something in her expression that was genuine. Not the managed sympathy of a professional trained in de-escalation, but the real thing, the slightly helpless quality of someone who had watched an injustice happen and done the most they could and was living with the gap between what they'd done and what they'd wanted to do. "You did your job," he said. "You confirmed the manifest. That mattered." She nodded once, quickly, and moved back toward the galley. Somewhere over Nebraska, he guessed Nebraska, though it could have been Kansas, the flatlands had their own anonymity from altitude. Jalen became aware that someone was standing in the aisle next to him. He looked up. It was a man he hadn't noticed before. Mid-40s, light brown skin, close-cropped hair going silver at the temples. Wearing a gray blazer over an open-collar shirt. He was holding a glass of orange juice and looking at Jalen with an expression that was direct without being intrusive. "I'm in 4A, the man said. "Directly behind you." Jalen said nothing, waiting. "My name is Daniel Osei," the man said. "I'm an attorney." Civil rights practice, Chicago. I had my phone out from the moment she said what she said, and I have the full, unedited video from before the flight attendant arrived, from before security, the whole thing. I wanted you to know that. Jalen looked at him steadily. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've been watching you for 3 hours, Daniel Osei said, and you haven't shown a single reaction that could be misread. And I've been watching the edited clip that's circulating on my phone, and I want you to understand that what's in my camera roll looks nothing like what's in that clip. He paused. And because I've been in your position before, in different rooms with different variables, and someone handed me something useful when I needed it, so... Jalen was quiet for a moment. I have legal representation, he said. Good, Daniel said. They're going to want what I have. Here. He held out a business card. The old-fashioned kind, thick cardstock, just his name and 2 contact numbers. Whatever you need. I'm not asking for anything. This is just, I know what I saw. Jalen took the card. He looked at it. He looked back up at Daniel Osei. Thank you, he said. And he meant it in the way that thanks means something when it's not courtesy, when it's the acknowledgement of a thing given freely at a moment when freely given things are rare. Daniel Osei nodded and walked back to 4A. Jalen put the card in his breast pocket, next to his heart, next to his daughter's initials on the briefcase clasp, and he looked out the window again. He had been building Crossgate Innovations for 8 years. He had started it at 22, the year after he graduated from Northwestern with a degree in computer science and a minor in economics, and a full awareness that the world he was entering was not designed with him in mind. He had started it in a studio apartment in Wicker Park with a laptop, a whiteboard he'd bought at an office supply store and propped against the wall, and a business plan that 3 separate investors had told him was ambitious, which was the word they used when they meant impossible, but didn't want the liability of saying so directly. He had made it possible anyway. Not easily, not without cost. But he had made it. The company now had 412 employees. It had offices in Chicago, San Francisco, Austin, and London. Its infrastructure solutions were embedded in the operational architecture of 63 financial institutions, 14 government agencies, and more than 200 mid-size enterprises across 11 countries. The $500 million annual contract he had terminated that morning, the one that had gone out from his legal team at 10:53 a.m., while he was still in the terminal at O'Hare, was with a financial data consortium whose primary backer was the Whitaker Group, a family investment entity that Sloan Whitaker's father had built over 30 years and that Sloan herself had been increasingly positioned to inherit. He hadn't terminated that contract because of the seat. He'd been planning to terminate it for 3 months, ever since an internal audit had surfaced irregularities in the data-sharing protocols that Crossgate's compliance team had flagged as potentially violating 2 separate regulatory frameworks. He had brought it to the Whitaker Group's attention twice, formally, in writing, and received responses that were technically responsive and substantively meaningless, the corporate equivalent of a nod that meant we hear you and intend to do nothing. The decision to terminate had been finalized in a board discussion 6 days ago. The timing, the fact that the formal execution of the contract termination had happened to be scheduled for this particular morning was not design. It was coincidence. It was the calendar being what calendars are, indifferent to drama, unmoved by irony. But Sloan Whitaker didn't know that. And when she found out, when the calls started hitting her phone, when her advisors started reaching her, when the market movements translated themselves from numbers into consequences she could feel, she was going to think she knew the shape of what this was. She was going to think he'd done it in retaliation. She was going to think this was personal. And that misunderstanding was going to be, in a very particular way, the most dangerous thing about the next 48 hours. Because a person who believes they are being hunted acts differently from a person who is simply being held accountable. And the difference in how they act would determine a great deal about what happened next. Jalen was thinking through this, working it the way he worked any problem, from the outside in, mapping the terrain before choosing a path, when the cabin shifted. Not physically. The plane was steady, a long, smooth glide through cloudless air. But something changed in the texture of the space, the way a room changes when a door opens or a phone rings, a disruption in the frequency. He heard Sloan Whitaker's voice from 3A. She wasn't talking to anyone on the phone this time. She was talking to the flight attendant. A different one now, a man named Derek, who was working the rear of first class. And her voice had the bright, deliberate quality of someone who had regrouped and chosen a new approach. "I'd actually love to send something forward," she was saying. "A small gesture. Is there any way to send a drink to 2A? I'd like to acknowledge the misunderstanding earlier, something to clear the air." Jalen kept his eyes on the window. "Of course," Derek said. "What would you like to send?" "Whatever he's having," she said warmly. "And tell him I hope we can start over." Derek appeared beside Jalen 60 seconds later with a glass of water and a small card, the kind the airline kept in the galley for written messages, cream-colored with the carrier's logo in the corner. The card had 4 words written on it in a clean, slanted hand. "Can we talk?" "Yes." Jalen looked at the card. He looked at the glass of water. He picked up his existing glass of water, the one Carrie had brought him 40 minutes earlier, and took a measured sip from it. "Please tell her thank you," he said to Derek, "but I'm fine." Derek nodded and took the glass back. Jalen turned back to the window. He was not, despite appearances, made of stone. He understood what Sloan was doing, understood the logic of it even. The calculation that said the confrontation is already on video, the video is already circulating. The smartest move now is to reframe the narrative as a misunderstanding that both parties have moved past. It was not a stupid strategy. In fact, if the next 48 hours had gone the way she expected them to go, it might have worked. But Jalen Cross had not survived 8 years of building something in a world that kept telling him it wasn't possible by being susceptible to the appearance of resolution. He knew what reconciliation looked like, and he knew what it was being used as. And the distance between those two things was, at this moment, exactly the distance between letting this go and making sure it was documented. So he turned back to his legal pad, uncapped his pen, and began writing. Not strategy, not notes for Rachel or Marcus, but something quieter and more personal. He wrote his daughter's name at the top of a clean page, Maya. Underneath it, he wrote the date. Underneath that, he wrote nothing for a long time, just held the pen against the paper, and let himself feel for a moment the full weight of the morning, the particular exhaustion that comes not from what has been done to you, but from what you have had to be in response to it, the permanent costly discipline of not giving anyone a reason. He was still holding the pen when Carrie appeared beside him again, this time not with water. "Mr. Cross," she said, and something in her voice had changed. The professionalism was still there, but underneath it was a different quality, attention. "I'm sorry to bother you. I need to let you know that we received a message from United's operations team in Chicago. Apparently," she stopped, started again, more carefully. "A formal complaint was filed. From 3A. About the earlier incident." Jalen looked at her. "The complaint states that you created a threatening environment in the cabin, that you blocked the aisle and made another passenger feel unsafe." Carrie's voice remained carefully neutral, but something moved at the edges of it. Something that sounded, if Jalen had to name it, like controlled anger. United's protocol in these situations is to flag the file and conduct a review upon landing, which typically involves a pull-aside, Jalen said. "Yes." She held his gaze. "I want you to know that I will be providing my own full account of this incident to the review team, along with Derek, and that I've already submitted my written record to the senior supervisor." Jalen was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Carrie," he said. "I'm just doing my job," she said. "No," he said. "You're doing the right thing. Those aren't always the same." She held his gaze for one more second, then she moved away. Jalen put down his pen. He thought about what a complaint like this meant in practical terms, the bureaucratic sequence it set in motion, the flags it added to his traveler profile, the way these things compounded. He thought about Rachel Nguyen, his general counsel, who was in San Francisco and had been building a file since before Wheels Up. He thought about Daniel Osei in 4A with unedited footage on his phone. He thought about the $500 million contract termination, the 7 calls to the Crossgate main line, the frantic vibrations that were going to start hitting Sloan Whitaker's world the moment she had a reliable cellular signal over the California coast. And he thought about the edited clip. 60,000 views, Marcus had said. That was an hour ago. He picked up his phone and searched his own name. 140,000 views, trending in business and finance. The hashtag Jalen Cross had appeared in the last 20 minutes. Not from his side, not from anyone he knew, but from the organic, uncontrollable motion of people who had watched the video and had opinions. He scrolled past the edited clip, past the aggressive executive framing, past the breathless quote tweets from accounts he didn't recognize. He scrolled until he found what he was looking for. The raw footage, posted by an account called @flightwatch_ORD, captioned simply, full video. Seat 2A United 447. Make your own judgment. It had 42,000 views. It had been posted 17 minutes after the edited version. He watched it. He watched it the way you watch footage of something you've lived, with the strange double consciousness of both recognizing what's happening and observing it from outside, seeing the shape of a thing you were inside and couldn't see whole. He watched himself walk down the aisle. He watched himself present his boarding pass. He watched Sloan say the sentence, and even now, even on a 4-inch screen in a compressed video file, it landed with the full weight of what it was. The words were clear. The expression was clear. The cabin's reaction was clear. He watched himself stand there, steady, not aggressive, not threatening, still. He watched the full footage of the security officers checking his ID, checking the manifest, confirming his seat. He watched Sloan's boarding pass being examined and found wrong. He watched the aisle maneuver, the way she'd positioned herself, the way he'd turned sideways, the deliberateness of every angle. And on video, from the outside, it was even more obvious than it had felt in the moment. The trap set, the trap navigated, the whole thing documented by cameras she had assumed were recording what she wanted them to record. He put his phone down. Outside the window, the terrain below had changed, the flatlands giving way to the first wrinkled edges of the Rockies, the brown geometry of the plains breaking apart into ridges and shadows, and the suggestion of altitude. The mountains always appeared from the air as something slightly unreal, too dramatic for the orderly world of continental geography, too absolute. Jalen thought about a conversation he'd had with his father 15 years ago, the year he graduated high school. His father had been a maintenance supervisor for the Chicago Transit Authority for 22 years, a man who fixed things, who understood systems, who had spent his entire working life in the infrastructure of a city that most people used without thinking about how it ran. The world is going to tell you. His father had said this over a kitchen table in their apartment in Bronzeville, over a dinner that had stretched past 10 p.m., because neither of them had wanted it to end. The world is going to tell you that you have to fight twice as hard for half as much. And that's true. But that's not the whole truth. The whole truth is that you have to be twice as precise, not just harder, precise. Because precision is the thing they can't argue with. Numbers don't have a race. Evidence doesn't have a race. Build something that's so precisely true that there's no angle of attack on it. That's your armor. Jalen had built his armor. He was wearing it now, sitting in 2A at 37,000 feet, watching the Rockies emerge from the plains with the slow, geological patience of things that had been building for longer than anyone could remember. And he was thinking about what came next. The landing, the pull-aside, the review, the board meeting, the Rachel call, the Marcus debrief, and the 41 hours that had already been compressed by everything that had happened before they'd even left the ground. Behind him, in 3A, Sloan Whitaker's phone began to vibrate. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He could tell from the quality of the silence that followed, the way the background texture of the cabin changed, the held breath quality of it, that something had reached her. One of the calls, one of the messages, something from her world arriving early, not waiting for landing. He heard her voice, low, controlled, and then not quite as controlled. He heard, "What do you mean it's been terminated?" And then she caught herself and dropped her voice below what the cabin could catch. Jalen looked out the window. The Rockies were enormous beneath them now, white-capped, ancient, indifferent to the small dramas of the people passing over them in pressurized metal tubes at 500 miles per hour. He thought about his daughter again, about the Sunday exchange, about the particular look on Maya's face when she was about to say something important, the way she gathered herself, the way she drew a breath, the way she looked directly at you like she'd decided that whatever she was about to say deserved to be said cleanly and without apology. She was 8 years old, She had already figured out things it had taken him decades to understand. He smiled, briefly, privately, the kind of smile that lives in the corners of things. He picked up his pen. He wrote one more line on the legal pad, below his daughter's name, below the date, in the clean and careful handwriting of a man who had learned that words put on paper with intention were different from words spoken into the air. He wrote, "Precision. Not just harder, precise." Then he closed the legal pad, capped the pen, and watched the mountains pass beneath him, patient as the ground itself, waiting for the descent. The descent into San Francisco began somewhere over the Sierra Nevada, the mountains giving way to the Central Valley's flat brown expanse, and then the Bay Area emerging from the afternoon haze like a city that had decided to be beautiful despite the fog and the salt air and the particular gray light that lived there year-round. Jalen had always liked San Francisco from the air, the way the bay caught the light, the way the bridges looked architectural rather than functional, the way the city clustered on its hills as if it had been arranged by someone with aesthetic opinions. He closed his legal pad. He straightened his jacket. He put his pen back in the interior pocket of his briefcase, next to Daniel Osei's business card, next to the folded copy of the custody schedule he kept with him always, a habit that had started in the first year after the divorce, when having the paper copy in his pocket was the only thing that made the distance feel manageable. The fastened seatbelt sign came on with a soft chime. Behind him, Sloan Whitaker had been quiet for the last 40 minutes of the flight. Not the settled quiet of someone at peace, but the compressed, strategic quiet of someone who has received information they are still processing. He had heard 2 more brief phone fragments before she'd put the phone away entirely and gone still. "I understand what you're telling me, but that's not..." And then 15 minutes later, a single sentence that had come out clipped and final. "Call everyone. Tonight." He hadn't turned around. He hadn't needed to. The wheels touched down at 1:47 p.m. Pacific time. The cabin decompressed in the usual way. Seatbelts clicking, bags rustling, the collective exhale of people who had been suspended between places and were now, finally, somewhere. Jalen stayed in his seat while the rows ahead deplaned, not from any particular strategy, just from the long-developed preference for not rushing toward choke points. He had learned that the people who pushed hardest to be first off planes were usually the people who had somewhere to be and no actual plan for getting there faster. Carrie appeared at the front of the cabin as the crowd thinned. "Mr. Cross," she said, and her voice had the careful quality again. Not managed this time, but genuinely careful, the way you are careful with something that matters. "There are 2 United representatives waiting at the jet bridge, supervisor level. They've been asked to speak with you before you proceed to baggage claim." Jalen stood. He buttoned his jacket. He picked up his briefcase. "Thank you, Carrie," he said, "for everything today." She held his gaze. "The written record I submitted, it's time-stamped and on file with the senior supervisor in the operations desk. Derek's account is there too. The manifest confirmation, the boarding pass check, all of it." She paused. "I just wanted you to know it exists." "I know," he said, "and it matters." He walked to the front of the plane. He stepped through the door into the jet bridge. And there they were. 2 men in United blazers standing with the particular posture of people who had been briefed on a situation and were hoping the situation would be simpler in person than it had been in the briefing. The taller one extended a hand. "Mr. Cross, I'm Regional Operations Supervisor David Hartwell. I appreciate your patience. We'd like to..." "Is this a formal inquiry?" Jalen said. Not aggressive, just factual. Hartwell paused. "It's a standard review following a filed complaint. Then I'd like my attorney on the line before we proceed," Jalen said. "That's not a difficulty. She's expecting my call. It'll take 2 minutes." Another pause. Hartwell looked at the second man, who gave nothing back. "Of course," Hartwell said. Jalen stepped to the side of the jet bridge and called Rachel and Gwen. She picked up on the first ring. "You're on the ground." "I'm on the ground. United has 2 supervisors waiting for a review. Formal complaint filed by the passenger in 3A. "Put them on speaker," Rachel said, her voice shifting into the precise, unhurried register she used when she was working. "Actually, don't. Hand the phone to the senior supervisor." Jalen walked back to Hartwell and held out the phone. "My general counsel would like to speak with you." Hartwell took the phone with the expression of a man who had expected a conversation and had instead encountered a structure. He listened for approximately 90 seconds. His expression changed 3 times, first cautious, then attentive, then something that looked like the specific resignation of a person who has just understood that the ground they were standing on is less solid than they'd assumed. He handed the phone back to Jalen. "Mr. Cross," he said, "we're going to conduct this review through formal written channels. You're free to proceed. We'll be in touch through your legal representative." Jalen took the phone. "Rachel." "Walk," she said. "I'll talk." "Oh." He walked through the terminal, the long, glassy corridor of SFO's International Terminal, past the coffee shops and bookstores, and the particular exhausted energy of an airport in mid-afternoon, with the phone to his ear and Rachel Nguyen's voice building a structure around the last 5 hours. "The edited clip is at 280,000 views," she said. "The full footage is at 94,000. The gap matters, and we're going to close it. I've already been in contact with 2 of the passengers who posted unedited versions. Daniel Osei, the attorney from 4A, and a woman named Patricia Huang, who was in 1B. Both have agreed to provide originals with full metadata intact." "Osei gave me his card on the plane," Jalen said. "I know. He called me 40 minutes ago." A beat. "He's good people." "He is." "Here's where we are," Rachel said, and her voice sharpened slightly. Not harsher, just more precise, the scalpel coming out. "Sloan Whitaker's formal complaint to United alleges that you created a threatening atmosphere, that you refused to comply with crew instructions, and that you physically positioned yourself in a way that made her fear for her safety. Every one of those allegations is directly contradicted by the manifest record, the flight crew's written accounts, and 3 separate video recordings. We have a clean factual record. The issue right now is not the facts. The issue is velocity." "The narrative is moving faster than the facts," Jalen said. "Correct. Her PR team. And she has one. I've already identified 3 accounts that are clearly coordinated. They've been pushing the edited version with the aggressive executive framing since before your flight landed. The goal is to establish the narrative before the full footage gets traction. It's a standard playbook. Get the story out fast, get it everywhere, and by the time the correction arrives, people have already formed an opinion." Jalen walked past a gate where a flight to Portland was boarding, a line of people standing with the resigned patience of the modern traveler, each one sealed in their own small world of phone and earbuds and private thought. "So we move faster," he said. "We move smarter," Rachel said. "Faster and wrong is worse than where we are now. I need 48 hours to build the full package. Authenticated videos, time-stamped metadata, the airline's internal footage, which we've already formally requested, the written crew accounts, the manifest record, and a broader pattern of conduct that I'm going to get to in a moment." "What broader pattern?" "Sloan Whitaker," such Rachel said, and he could hear her pulling up documents on the other end of the line, the subtle keyboard sound, the small pause of a person navigating information. 26 years old. She's the eldest child of Harlan Whitaker, who built the Whitaker Group starting in the 90s, real estate, financial services, and a series of strategic investments in airline infrastructure that started in 2004 and now touch 6 carriers, including United. Sloan has been working inside the group for 4 years, with formal executive title for the last 18 months. In that time, there have been 3 formal complaints filed against her with separate entities. One with a hotel in New York, one with a private aviation company in Miami, one with a financial services firm in London. None of them went anywhere. Why not? Because the Whitaker Group has long-term relationships with all 3 entities. Because the complaints were filed by people without the resources to pursue them past the initial stage. And because in each case, the framing shifted. The original incident became a misunderstanding, or the complaining party was quietly compensated, or the record was just thin. The kind of thin that happens when someone with money and connections doesn't want a record to be thick. Jalen had stopped walking without realizing it. He was standing near a window that looked out onto the tarmac. Gates and planes and fuel trucks in the flat afternoon light, the ordinary machinery of the world in motion. "She's done this before," he said. Not a question. "A version of it," Rachel said. "Not always with this particular script, but the dynamic, using access and relationships to make problems disappear before they become problems. Yes. We're going to document it. Rachel. Yeah. The contract termination, he said. She's going to frame it as retaliation. She's going to say I terminated the Whitaker Consortium contract because of what happened on the plane. I know. The timeline disproves that. The board decision was 6 days ago. The compliance flags were 3 months ago. The formal communications to the Whitaker group were in writing, dated, recorded. I know, Rachel said again. We have all of it. The documentation is clean. The question is whether we release it proactively or whether we let her push the retaliation narrative and then correct it. I lean toward proactive, but I want your read. Jalen looked out at the tarmac. A plane was pushing back from the gate. Slow, deliberate, guided by the small tug vehicle that made the whole massive thing look manageable from a distance. Proactive, he said. But not tonight. Tonight I have a board meeting and a call with you and Marcus. I want the full package built before anything goes out publicly. I don't want to release pieces. I want to release everything at once. That's what I'd recommend, Rachel said. One more thing, Jalen said. The airline's internal footage, the cameras in the jetway and in the cabin. I want that formally requested today, not tomorrow, today. And I want the request to include a preservation order so nothing gets archived before we see it. Already sent, Rachel said, 40 minutes ago. He allowed himself a breath that was almost a laugh, the specific warmth of having the right people around you doing the right things before you asked. Okay, he said. I'll see you tonight. One more thing, Rachel said, echoing his phrasing back at him. And something in her voice had shifted, slightly more careful, which for Rachel meant the thing she was about to say was the kind of thing she'd weighed before saying. There's going to be a window sometime in the next 24 to 36 hours where she tries to reach you directly. Not through lawyers, personally. She'll want to frame it as an attempt to resolve things privately. I want you prepared for that. How do you know that? Because it's what I would do if I were her, Rachel said simply. And because the alternative is letting everything play out in public, and she doesn't know yet how complete our documentation is. She still thinks this is manageable if she can get you in a room and find the right number. Jalen was quiet for a moment. There's no number, he said. I know that, Rachel said, but she doesn't yet. A pause. That's actually our advantage. Go on. The board meeting was in a glass-walled conference room on the 22nd floor of a building in the financial district, with a view of the bay that on clear days was almost unreasonably beautiful, and on fog days was a solid gray wall that made the room feel like it existed inside a cloud. Today was a fog day. Jalen found it appropriate. Marcus Webb was waiting outside the elevator. Dark suit, no tie, the particular alert stillness of a man who had been running full speed for 6 hours and had forced himself to stop and collect before this specific moment. He was 41 years old, had been with Crossgate since the Series A round, and had the kind of institutional knowledge of the company that made him irreplaceable in the particular way that transcended any job description. He looked at Jalen when the elevator opened. You look like you've had a day, Marcus said. That's generous, Jalen said. They walked toward the conference room. Boards all present, Marcus said quietly. Chen and Okafor are on screen from London. Everyone has seen some version of the footage. I couldn't control that. It was already everywhere by noon. I gave them a factual summary about 2 hours ago, so they're not walking in cold. The mood is... He paused, choosing the word carefully. Steady. Nobody is panicking, but they want to hear from you directly. Good, Jalen said. That's what I want too. He walked into the room. There were 7 board members present in person, 4 in their chairs around the long table, 2 standing near the window with coffee, 1 just arriving from a side room. On the screens at the far end, James Chen from London, silver-haired, patrician, who had been one of Crossgate's first institutional investors, and who had the quality of a man who had survived enough market cycles to be genuinely unshockable. And Amara Okafor, Lagos-born and London-based, who sat on 4 boards and brought to all of them the particular clarity of someone who had learned to read situations from the outside in. Jalen set his briefcase on the table. He did not sit. I know you've all seen some version of what happened this morning, he said. I'm going to tell you the actual version, and then I'm going to tell you what we're doing about it, and then I'm going to tell you about the board agenda for tomorrow, because that meeting is happening regardless of what's in the news cycle, and I need all of you fully present for it. He paused. Nobody spoke. The room had the quality of full attention. Not the polite attention of people in a meeting, but the real kind, the kind where the air itself seems to lean in. I boarded United Flight 447 from O'Hare this morning with a confirmed ticket in seat 2A. That seat was occupied by Sloan Whitaker, 26 years old, a principal in the Whitaker Group, which, as most of you know, is a financial entity with which Crossgate recently terminated a major contract due to compliance issues that have been fully documented and reviewed by this board. Sloan Whitaker refused to vacate my seat. In the process of that refusal, she made a public statement that I will not repeat here because it doesn't need to be repeated. It's on video, clearly audible, and fully documented. The airline confirmed the seat assignment. Security confirmed the manifest. I did not raise my voice. I did not make physical contact. I sat in my seat. I flew to San Francisco. He looked around the table. After landing, a formal complaint was filed against me by Ms. Whitaker, alleging a threatening atmosphere. That complaint is being handled by my legal team. It is without factual support and is directly contradicted by the written accounts of 2 crew members, the airline manifest, and multiple unedited video recordings from passengers in the cabin. He paused again. James Chen spoke from the London screen, measured the way he always was, like a man who had learned that measured was usually right. Jalen, Chen said, the edited clip that's been circulating, the aggressive executive framing, how wide is it? 340,000 views as of an hour ago, Jalen said. The full footage is at 120,000. My legal and communications teams are working to close that gap. We have authenticated full-length recordings, time-stamped metadata, and formal written crew accounts. We will be releasing a comprehensive public response in the next 48 hours. What's the exposure to Crossgate? Amar Okafor asked from her screen. Her voice was precise and unsentimental, the voice of a person who cared deeply and showed it through rigor rather than warmth. Short-term noise, Jalen said. The narrative is negative right now because it's incomplete. Once the full documentation is released, it reverses. And the reversal is actually an opportunity, because the contrast between the incomplete version and the complete version will itself become the story. The facts are entirely on our side. The only question is timing and execution. And the Whitaker contract termination? Okafor pressed. The timing is going to be used against you. Yes, Jalen said. It will be framed as retaliation. That framing is false, and we have a complete documentary record that proves it. Board minutes, compliance reports, formal written communications to the Whitaker Group dating back 3 months. The timeline is unambiguous. The termination was decided 6 days ago, executed this morning on a schedule set before today's events. Rachel Nguyen has the full file. He looked around the room again, at the faces in the chairs, at Chen and Okafor on the screens, at Marcus standing near the door. I want to be clear about one thing, Jalen said, and his voice shifted slightly. Not harder, but more direct. The way it got when he was saying something he had decided to say cleanly and without softening. What happened this morning was not primarily a business problem. It was a human one. It happened to me in a professional context, which means it has professional implications, and we're handling those implications with everything we have. But I'm not going to stand here and present this to you as a PR challenge to be managed. It was a woman sitting in my seat and telling me that seat wasn't for people like me. I have documentation. I have legal representation. I have the facts. And I intend to make sure the full truth is public, not because of what it does for Crossgate's stock price, but because the truth is what I've always built on, and I'm not changing that now. Silence. It lasted long enough to be meaningful. Then Okafor said from her screen, "We support you completely, all of us. What do you need from the board?" Jalen exhaled, almost imperceptibly, but Marcus saw it and filed it away, the way he filed everything about Jalen that mattered. "Nothing tonight," Jalen said. "Let my team work. Show up tomorrow morning ready to talk about Q4 strategy, because that's what this company needs right now. To keep moving." They kept moving. The board meeting ran 2 hours and 20 minutes and covered the Q4 revenue projections, the London expansion timeline, a capital structure question that James Chen had been raising since July, and finally got a satisfying resolution, and a 15-minute discussion of the compliance frameworks that had led to the Whitaker Group termination. which now, in the context of the day, had an additional resonance that nobody directly named but everyone felt. Afterward, Jalen sat in the same glass-walled room with Marcus and Rachel. Rachel had joined in person, having been in the building since noon, and the three of them worked through the documentation strategy with the focused, quiet efficiency of people who had been in hard rooms together before and knew how to move through problems without wasting motion on the parts that didn't need emotion. Rachel spread files across the table, printed, because she believed in printed files for strategy sessions, believed that screens made things feel temporary when you needed them to feel real. "Here's the full package as it stands," she said. Unedited cabin footage from 3 separate passengers, Osei, Huang, and a third passenger who contacted us voluntarily this afternoon, a man named Greg Torres who was in 5B and had a clear line of sight to the aisle during the entire incident. All 3 files have been authenticated for metadata, timestamps, device IDs, geolocation. None have been altered. She placed a second file on the table. The airline's internal footage, we don't have it yet, but the formal request with preservation order went out at 1:15, and United's legal team acknowledged receipt at 3:42. They have 14 days to respond. We'll push for expedited review given the public nature of the incident. Third file. The written accounts from Carrie Delgado, lead flight attendant, and Derek Morrison, secondary attendant, both time-stamped, both submitted through United's formal incident reporting system, both consistent with the manifest record and the passenger footage. Carrie's account is particularly detailed. She has the exact wording Sloan Whitaker used, the timeline of the manifest check, the boarding pass discrepancy. "Carrie was brave today," Jalen said. "She was," Rachel agreed. "And her documentation is going to matter." She placed a fourth file. This one was thicker. "This is the broader pattern," she said. "The 3 prior complaints I mentioned, I've spent the last 6 hours tracking them down. One of them was settled confidentially, but the settlement didn't include a non-disclosure for the filing party, which means the person can talk if they choose. I've made contact through an intermediary. No commitment yet, but the door is open." She paused. "The other 2. One was filed and then quietly dropped after the Whitaker Group made a significant donation to the filing company's charitable foundation. The other was withdrawn when the complaining employee was offered a substantial severance package." Marcus leaned forward. "So there's a pattern of making things go away." "Clear pattern," Rachel said. "And the pattern matters because it establishes that what happened today was not an isolated incident. It was a consistent mode of operation, which changes the legal and public landscape significantly." Jalen looked at the files spread across the table. He looked at the bay through the glass wall. The fog had lifted slightly, enough that the bridge was visible as a shape in the gray, a suggestion of structure. "When do we release?" he said. 48 hours from now," Rachel said. "I want the airline footage or a documented refusal before we go. If we have it, it's part of the package. If they refuse or delay, the refusal is part of the package. Either way, we go in 48 hours. "What about tonight?" Marcus asked. "The edited clip is still the dominant version online." "Tonight," Rachel said, "we release one thing, not the full package, just a single statement, 2 paragraphs, confirming that the incident occurred, that Mr. Cross was confirmed in his assigned seat, and that full documentation is being prepared for release. No detail, no footage, no accusations, just a clean factual anchor." "The anchor statement," Jalen said. "Exactly. It tells anyone who's watching that there's more coming. It stops the narrative from setting completely, and it forces the other side to respond to an official statement rather than just a video clip." Jalen nodded once. "Draft it." Rachel pulled a single sheet of paper from beneath the file stack. She placed it in front of him. He read it. It was, as everything Rachel produced, exactly right. No word doing more work than it needed to, no claim that outran the documentation, the 2 paragraphs of it having the clean, load-bearing quality of a well-built wall. He slid it back. "Send it." "Already have the distribution list ready," she said. "Goes out at 8 p.m. Pacific. 90 minutes from now." He leaned back in his chair. The exhaustion was present now. Not the sharp, adrenaline-lit exhaustion of the flight, but the long, settling kind that comes after sustained precision, the tiredness of a mind that has been running complex calculations for 12 hours without pause. He thought about Maya. He thought about Sunday. 60 hours from now, which suddenly felt both very far and very close. I need to make a call, he said. Marcus and Rachel understood, the way people who know you well understand, and they gathered the files with the quiet efficiency of people who had other things to do and were going to do them. Jalen waited until the room was his alone. He called his ex-wife. It rang 3 times. She picked up with the slightly guarded quality she always had when his calls came in outside of the custody schedule. Not hostile, just careful, the emotional equivalent of the door opened on a chain. "Diane," he said. "Hey." A pause. "I saw some things online. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," he said. "I'm in San Francisco. I'll be back before Sunday." "Okay." Another pause. Longer this time, with a different texture. "Maya's been asking about you. She saw something. One of her friend's parents was talking about it, and she heard." Jalen closed his eyes briefly. "What did she hear?" "Not much. Just that you were on the news. She wants to know if you're in trouble." "Tell her I'm not in trouble," he said. "Tell her I handled something the right way, and it got complicated. But I handled it the right way, and that's what matters." Diane was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, something in her voice had softened, the chain coming off the door just a little. "You did, didn't you?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yeah," he said. "I did." "Then I'll tell her that," Diane said. "Come back safe." He ended the call. He sat in the glass room for another few minutes, alone with the fog and the distant shape of the bridge, and the particular silence of a city that was continuing on around him without any knowledge of or interest in the day he had just lived. He thought about Sloane Whitaker, about the phone calls that had started hitting her world over the Rockies, about the message on the cream-colored card, "Can we talk?" and the calculation behind it, the belief that there was still a lever to pull, a number to reach, a version of this that could be made to go away. He thought about what Rachel had said. She still thinks this is manageable if she can get you in a room and find the right number. That's actually our advantage. He thought about the 4 words his father had said over a kitchen table in Bronzeville 15 years ago. He thought about the legal pad in his briefcase with his daughter's name at the top of a page and 1 line below it. Then he stood, buttoned his jacket, picked up his briefcase, and walked out of the glass room toward the elevator. The documentation was building. The anchor was going out at 8 p.m., the 48-hour clock was running, and somewhere across the city, in whatever hotel or office or car Sloane Whitaker was in right now, her world was beginning to understand what had arrived. He pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator descended, smooth and even, all the way down. The anchor statement went out at 8:02 p.m. Pacific time, 2 minutes behind Rachel's schedule, which she noted with mild displeasure in a text to Marcus that he chose not to relay to Jalen. It read, in its entirety, "On the morning of November 14th, Mr. Jalen Cross, CEO of Crossgate Innovations, boarded United Flight 447 from Chicago O'Hare to San Francisco with a confirmed reservation in seat 2A. That seat was occupied by another passenger who refused to vacate. The airline's manifest and crew records confirm Mr. Cross's assignment. A formal complaint filed against Mr. Cross following the incident is without factual basis and is directly contradicted by airline records, crew accounts, and multiple independent video recordings. Full documentation is being prepared for public release. Crossgate Innovations has no further comment at this time." 2 paragraphs, 109 words. It landed in the news cycle the way a stone lands in water. Not with a splash, but with a ring, a slow expansion outward that touched everything around it. By 9:15 p.m., it had been screenshotted and posted approximately 8,000 times across Twitter and Instagram. By 10 p.m., 3 national journalists had reached out to Rachel's office requesting comment. By 10:45 p.m., the phrase "Seat 2A" was trending for the second time that day. But this time, the conversation attached to it had a different shape. People were waiting. The statement had told them there was more coming, and the internet, whatever its failures, was reliably good at waiting for the next thing when the next thing had been promised. Jalen was not watching any of it. He was in his hotel room on the 23rd floor of a Marriott 2 blocks from the financial district, sitting on the edge of the bed in his undershirt and suit trousers, his jacket over the chair, his shoes placed neatly by the door, a room service plate of food beside him that he had eaten approximately half of before his appetite disappeared. His phone was face down on the nightstand. His laptop was open on the desk, but he wasn't looking at it. He was looking at a photograph on his phone, the one he'd taken last Sunday, the last morning he'd had with Maya before the custody week switched. She was at the kitchen table in their apartment, the Chicago morning light coming through the window the way it did in November, at a low golden angle that made everything look slightly more important than it was. She was in her pajamas, the ones with the small yellow stars on a navy background that she'd had for 2 years, and refused to give up despite having outgrown them by at least 2 inches. She was looking at the camera with an expression that was half smile, half the private assessment of someone who had decided to give you the benefit of the doubt, but wanted you to know it was a decision, not a given. She was 8 years old, and she already had more dignity than most adults he knew. He set the phone down. He picked up the room service fork. He ate 3 more bites. He put it down again. His phone buzzed, face down, so he saw only the vibration, felt it travel through the nightstand. He turned it over. Unknown number. San Francisco area code. He watched it ring through to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text from Rachel. Unknown SF number. Just tried your cell. Don't answer unknowns tonight. I'll trace it in the morning. He typed back. Already didn't. He put the phone face down again. The city outside his window was doing what cities do at 11 p.m., settling into its nighttime frequencies, the traffic thinner, the sounds more distinct, a siren somewhere far away rising and falling like a question that didn't wait for an answer. He had always found hotel rooms in other cities to have a particular quality at night. Not lonely, exactly, but solitary in a specific way. The way you're solitary when you've chosen the work that puts you in those rooms and you understand the cost of the choice without regretting the choice itself. He thought about calling Marcus. He decided against it. Marcus was still working, was always still working, and the work was in good hands, and what Jalen needed right now was not more information. He turned off the lamp. He lay back on the bed, still in his trousers and undershirt, and looked at the ceiling in the dark, and let the day move through him the way a long day has to move through you if you're going to have any of yourself left for the next one. He was asleep inside 10 minutes. Tip. He woke at 5:47 a.m. to his alarm and the specific clarity of a morning that follows a day you've survived intact. Not triumphant, too early for that, and triumph was never exactly the right word for what he aimed for, but intact. The word his father used for a hard day well handled. You came out of it whole, son. That's the thing. You came out whole. He showered, he dressed, he ordered coffee and sat at the desk with his laptop and went through everything Rachel had sent in the night. There was a lot. The overnight news cycle had been, as she'd predicted, a contest between the edited framing and the anchor statement. The aggressive executive narrative was still circulating, but it had picked up a competing thread, fragments of the full footage appearing in comment sections, people who had seen both versions beginning to note the discrepancies. The specific digital forensics that ordinary citizens performed when they were motivated, comparing timestamps, noting the jump cuts in the edited version, pointing out what was missing. More significantly, 2 journalists had independently identified the discrepancy in Sloan's boarding pass, 3A, not 2A, and one of them, a reporter at the Chicago Tribune named Simone Park, who covered business and technology, had already published a brief factual piece noting that the airline's manifest records, which she had obtained through a source in United's operations, confirmed Jalen's seat assignment and showed no record of any rerouting or reseating at the gate. It wasn't the full story, but it was a factual anchor in print with a byline from a publication that still carried the institutional weight of the word newspaper. Rachel had flagged it with a single note. Simone Park is thorough and fair. She'll want the full package when we release. Worth considering. Jalen read the Tribune piece twice. He noted the tone, careful, factual, no adjectives doing political work, the kind of journalism that was becoming rarer and more valuable for its rarity. He made a mental note of the byline, then he opened the overnight message from Marcus. Jalen, 3 updates. 1. Crossgate stock opened up 1.8% on the Asian markets this morning. The street is reading the Whitaker termination as strategic clarity. Our institutional holders are stable. 2. 2 partners who went quiet yesterday have re-engaged. Both separately reached out this morning, indicating they'd reviewed the situation and wanted to maintain the relationship. I think the anchor statement helped. 3. And this is the one I want you to call me about before you talk to Rachel. There is a person named Victor Hale who has been trying to reach you. He left a message with our Chicago main line at 7 a.m. this morning. He identified himself as an attorney representing the Whitaker Group. He said he's calling on behalf of his client, not Sloan, the group itself, meaning Harlan Whitaker's organization, and that his client is interested in a private resolution before the full documentation release. He used the phrase mutually beneficial. I have not responded. Call me. Jalen set his coffee down. He called Marcus. Marcus picked up on the second ring. He was already at the office. Jalen could tell from the background sound, the particular acoustic texture of the Crossgate San Francisco space, open plan with high ceilings that gave voices a slight echo. You saw it, Marcus said. I saw it, Jalen said. Talk to me. Victor Hale is a real attorney, Marcus said. 22 years in practice, specializes in high net worth dispute resolution, has handled sensitive matters for the Whitaker Group for at least a decade based on public court records. This isn't a cold call from someone peripheral. This is a call from someone Harlan Whitaker personally authorized. Which means Harlan Whitaker knows, Jalen said. Which means Harlan Whitaker knows, Marcus confirmed, and is trying to get in front of it before we release. Jalen stood and walked to the window. The city was in its early morning state, the fog still thick at the bay level, the higher ground of the financial district emerging from it like an island, the light new and gray and uncommitted. What does mutually beneficial look like to them, do you think? Jalen said. Withdrawal of the complaint against you, probably a financial figure, possibly a request for NDA terms on both sides, and almost certainly a request to modify the documentation release, limit its scope, or delay it, or both. They want me to make it quiet, Jalen said. They want you to make it manageable, Marcus said, which from their perspective is the same thing. Jalen was quiet for a moment, watching the fog move over the bay, slow, independent, going where it intended to go regardless of the infrastructure below it. They don't know what we have, he said. No, Marcus said. They know about the passenger videos because those are public. They may know about the crew accounts if they have a source in United's operations. But they don't know about the 3 prior complaints. They don't know about the settlement withdrawal door that Rachel has open. And they don't know that we have Carrie Delgado's written account, which is Rachel told me what's in it, and it's detailed enough to... He stopped. Let's just say they don't know how complete the file is. Don't respond to Hale, Jalen said. Not today. Let Rachel know he called. Let her decide if and when we engage. That's what I figured, Marcus said. One more thing. Tell me. The flying privileges suspension came through formally this morning. United sent a written notice to your email at 6:42 a.m. I had access to root it. It says your account has been flagged pending review following a formal complaint, and that your ability to purchase tickets on United Continental Network is suspended pending the outcome of that review. The language is... Marcus paused, and something in his voice shifted slightly, took on an edge. The language is careful enough to be deniable, but it's clearly punitive. It came out of the complaint Sloan filed, and it went through on a timeline that Rachel said was unusually fast for this type of review. Jalen felt it. The particular, specific coldness of a system responding to the right pressure from the wrong person. He had known this was coming. Rachel had warned him. Knowing it was coming and feeling it arrive were different things, and the difference lived in the chest, in the part of you that was not strategy, but simply human. Add it to the file, he said. His voice was even. Already done, Marcus said. Rachel flagged it as potential evidence of coordinated retaliation, the speed of the suspension, the timing relative to the complaint, all of it. She's building the pattern. Good, Jalen said. Tell her I'll be there at 9. Rachel Nguyen's San Francisco office was not a large space. She operated out of a suite in a building on Montgomery Street that was deliberately understated, the kind of office that said, we do the work here, we don't perform it. There were no framed accolades on the walls. There were, instead, 3 whiteboards, 2 large monitors, a long table covered in files that were organized with a precision that looked casual until you tried to find anything and realized every item was exactly where it was for a reason. She was standing at one of the whiteboards when Jalen arrived. On it, in her careful, architectural handwriting, was a timeline, horizontal axis, dates, events marked with brief labels. She had used 3 colors: black for documented facts, blue for documented but not yet authenticated, red for patterns or inferences. There was very little red. "Marcus told you about Hale," she said, not looking up from the board. "He told me," Jalen said. He sat down at the table, set his briefcase down, poured himself coffee from the carafe in the center. "What's your read?" "My read is that Harlan Whitaker has been running a family empire for 30 years and has survived everything that's come at him by controlling information at the source," Rachel said, turning from the board. She had the particular energy of someone who had slept 4 hours and found it sufficient, not comfortable with the deprivation, but functional in it, the way certain lawyers were functional in conditions that would flatten ordinary people. "He's smart. He understands that Sloan created a problem that his usual tools, money, relationships, pressure, might not be sufficient to solve this time. Because this time, the problem is already partly public, and the person on the other side isn't filing a complaint with a hotel or walking away from a job. You're a CEO with resources and documentation and a legal team and a public profile." He's looking at this and thinking, "Find the number." "There's no number," Jalen said. "I know," Rachel said, "but I want to use the fact that he doesn't know that." She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Here's what I want to do. We don't respond to Hale today. We don't respond tomorrow. We let them sit with the silence and the anchor statement and the Tribune piece and the knowledge that we're building something they can't see. That silence is going to do work for us. It's going to make them anxious, and anxious people make moves, and the moves they make under anxiety are going to tell us things about what they're most afraid of." "What are they most afraid of?" Jalen said. "The prior complaints," Rachel said immediately. "The pattern. The 2 cases where the Whitaker group made problems go away through financial pressure. That's not just embarrassing. That's potentially material to regulatory and civil proceedings. If that pattern is documented in public, it changes the nature of what Sloan did yesterday from an isolated incident into the latest instance of a systematic practice. That's a completely different legal and reputational landscape." Jalen looked at the whiteboard. He looked at the timeline, the careful, color-coded progression of events, the architecture of a case being built with precision. "The woman in London," he said. "The one whose complaint was withdrawn after the severance." "Eleanor Marsh," Rachel said, 34 years old. She was a mid-level analyst at a financial services firm that had business ties to the Whitaker group. The complaint she filed alleged discriminatory conduct by Sloan Whitaker during a client meeting in 2021. The complaint was withdrawn 4 months later. 6 weeks before the withdrawal, Eleanor Marsh received a severance package that was 20 times her monthly salary. She signed an NDA. Rachel confirmed. But NDAs are not infinitely durable, especially when they're executed under circumstances that could be characterized as coercive. She paused. "I have a contact in London, a barrister I worked with on a cross-border matter in 2019. I reached out last night. He's looking at the document." Jalen was quiet for a moment. "And the New York complaint?" Carlos Reyes, 40 years old, former hotel concierge manager at a property in Midtown that the Whitaker family uses frequently, filed a complaint in 2022 alleging Sloan made racially demeaning comments to him during a stay in front of witnesses. The complaint went to the hotel's HR department. 3 weeks later, the Whitaker group made a $300,000 donation to the hotel's Employee Assistance Foundation, a foundation that, as far as I can determine, had never previously received a corporate donation from any source. Reyes withdrew the complaint 2 weeks after the donation. No NDA in this case, just the complaint disappeared. "Can he talk?" "He's willing to talk," Rachel said. "We spoke last night. He's been waiting for 2 years for someone to ask." Jalen felt something move through him. Not triumph, nothing as simple as that. Something quieter and more complicated. The feeling of a pattern becoming visible, of isolated moments connecting into a shape that had always been there but needed someone to map it. "How many people?" he said, and his voice was quieter now. "How many people did she do this to before she ran into someone who had the resources to push back?" Rachel held his gaze. We don't know yet, she said, but we're going to find out. The move came that afternoon, not from Victor Hale, not from the Whitaker Group's official channels. It came at 2:17 p.m. Pacific Time from a number Jalen didn't recognize. And this time, because Rachel had told him what to watch for, he answered it. Mr. Cross. The voice was female, controlled, and he recognized it immediately, not because he knew it well, but because it had been 3 rows behind him for 5 hours the previous day, and the particular quality of its self-possession was not something you forgot. Sloane Whitaker. Ms. Whitaker, he said. He was in Rachel's conference room. He caught Rachel's eye across the table and held up 2 fingers, the prearranged signal they had agreed on that morning. And Rachel immediately reached for her laptop and began documenting the timestamp, the number, the fact of the call. I think we need to talk, Sloane said. Directly, without the lawyers. I'm in my attorney's office, Jalen said. If you'd like to speak with me, my attorney can be present. A pause. Brief, almost imperceptible. I'd prefer this to be private. I'm sure you would, Jalen said. His voice was completely even. I'd prefer it to be documented. Another pause. When she spoke again, something in her register had shifted. Still controlled, but with a different quality underneath it now. The shift of someone who has prepared for one version of a conversation and found themselves in another. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding, she said, about yesterday, about everything. My family's legal team has been very clear with me about the way this is going to look if it continues on its current trajectory, and She stopped. Started again. I want to find a resolution. Define resolution, Jalen said. I'm prepared to withdraw the complaint against you with United. I'm prepared to have my PR firm issue a statement clarifying the circumstances of yesterday's incident, something that makes clear there was no malicious intent on my part. Jalen said nothing. He let the silence work. There could also be, she said, and now her voice had shifted to a register he recognized from the plane, the careful, calibrated tone of a negotiation being opened, the one that was trying to locate the threshold of what he needed to hear. A financial acknowledgement of the disruption to Crossgate's operations and to you personally. You're offering me money, Jalen said. I'm offering a comprehensive resolution package. Sloane. He used her first name deliberately, not warmly, but directly. The way you use a name when you want someone to stop performing and listen. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly. This is not a negotiation. There is no number. There is no PR statement that resolves this. What there is documentation. Full, authenticated, comprehensive documentation of what happened yesterday, and a documented pattern of similar conduct that extends back at least 3 years across multiple incidents and multiple victims. Silence. A different kind of silence from the one on the plane. That silence had been the silence of a cabin holding its breath. This was the silence of a person understanding, for possibly the first time, the full shape of what they were standing in front of. What do you want? She said. And her voice, for the first time, had dropped the performance entirely. It was just a voice now. Young and afraid and trying not to sound either. I want the truth to be public, Jalen said. All of it. The full footage, the pattern, the prior complaints, the financial pressure used to silence people who couldn't afford to push back. I want Eleanor Marsh and Carlos Reyes to have their stories heard. I want the systems that allowed this to be examined by the people whose job it is to examine them. And I want the airline that suspended my flying privileges in retaliation for a complaint that has no factual basis to reverse that suspension and answer for why it happened so fast. And if she stopped. If I do what you're describing, the people you mentioned, if their situations become public, then they become public, Jalen said. That's not a threat. That's just what happens when the truth is documented. My father, she stopped again. Your father's name appears in documentation because his organization made financial decisions that silenced people, Jalen said. That's in the record because it happened. I didn't put it there. He did. A long silence. You could have just taken the money, she said. And there was something in her voice now, not the earlier brittleness, but something raw, genuinely confused. As if the possibility that someone had declined to do the things she expected had introduced a variable she didn't have a category for. You could have made this quiet. Why didn't you just... Because quiet isn't the same as resolved, Jalen said. Because the next person you do this to might not have a lawyer and a COO and 3 authenticated video files. Because your money was not built on your competence. It was built on your family's connections and 30 years of making problems disappear before anyone noticed the pattern. And because I have a daughter who is 8 years old and I have to be able to look at her and tell her that when something wrong happened, I didn't make it go away. I made it right. Nothing on the line for a long moment. Then, when does it go out? Tomorrow morning, Jalen said. The line went quiet. He thought she might hang up. Instead, he heard her exhale. Long, uneven, the sound of something letting go that had been held very tight. The complaint with United, she said. I'll have it withdrawn tonight. Good, Jalen said. The other things, the people you mentioned, the prior. She stopped. I didn't think about them the way you're describing. I didn't. She stopped again. Jalen waited. I know that doesn't change anything, she said. No, he agreed. It doesn't. Another silence. Is there anything that would change what you're releasing? No, he said simply. But how you respond to it, publicly, going forward, that's yours to decide. What you do after the truth is out says more about you than what you did to put us here. He ended the call. He set the phone on the table. He looked at Rachel, who had been sitting across from him in complete stillness, documenting everything, and whose expression was now the particular mixture of professional satisfaction and something more personal. The expression of a woman who had been building a case for 2 days and had just heard the subject of it call and effectively confirm its completeness. She'll withdraw the complaint tonight, Jalen said. I'll expect the formal notification by 9 p.m., Rachel said. She was already typing. The call is documented, timestamp, number, duration, and I have notes on the content. Combined with everything else, she looked up from the laptop. This is a clean case, Jalen. What we have is a completely clean case. He nodded slowly. He thought about Eleanor Marsh in London, who had waited 3 years. He thought about Carlos Reyes in New York, who had told Rachel he'd been waiting for someone to ask. He thought about the 3 women on that flight. Carrie, who had confirmed his seat, Patricia Huang in 1B, who had held her phone steady, the unnamed others who had watched and felt the thing that couldn't be named out loud and had kept the footage anyway. He thought about Daniel Osei in 4A, who had come forward because someone had done the same for him once. He thought about Maya in her navy pajamas with the yellow stars, looking at him with that expression that was half smile and half deliberate trust. He picked up his pen. He had notes to make before tomorrow. Outside the windows of Rachel's office, the San Francisco afternoon was giving way to early evening, the light going golden and horizontal over the bay, the fog holding back for once, the city in that specific hour of clarity that felt like a gift, brief, dependable, and entirely real. The full documentation release was 20 hours away. Everything was in place. And in the stillness of that office, with the bay light coming through the windows and the files spread clean across the table and the work nearly done, Jalen Cross sat with his pen and his legal pad and let himself for just a moment feel the full weight of what it meant to have built something precise enough that the truth could stand on it. Then he bent his head. And he worked. The withdrawal of the complaint came through at 8:47 p.m. Rachel forwarded the notification to Jalen with a single line of text beneath it. As promised, file is complete. We go at 9 a.m. He read it sitting on the edge of the hotel bed in the same position he'd been in the night before, jacket over the chair, shoes by the door, the room service plate again only half finished. And he felt something that wasn't relief exactly, but was adjacent to it, the feeling of a structure holding the weight it was built to hold. He put the phone down. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about the phone call with Sloane, the way her voice had moved through its registers, from controlled to calculating to something that was simply bare. He had not felt satisfaction during that call. He had felt something more complicated, the recognition that the person on the other end of the line was not a villain in the way that villains existed in simple stories. She was a young woman who had been raised inside a system that had never once required her to encounter her own capacity for harm. A greenhouse existence, perfectly climate-controlled, where every consequence had been managed before it could grow into something she'd have to look at. What she'd done on that plane was ugly and deliberate, and had caused real damage to real people. That was true. And it was also true that she had never, in 26 years, been asked to sit with what she was capable of without someone arriving to make it comfortable. He wasn't making it comfortable. But he wasn't interested in her destruction either. He was interested in the truth. Those were different projects, and the difference mattered. He slept 6 hours. He woke at 5:30. He showered, dressed in a fresh charcoal suit. He'd packed 2, a habit from years of delayed flights and extended trips. And he sat at the desk with his coffee and went through the final package one more time. Rachel had sent it at midnight. The complete documentation file, 47 pages, organized with the architectural precision that was her signature. The 3 authenticated passenger videos with full metadata reports. The written accounts from Carrie Delgado and Derek Morrison. The manifest records from United's operations system. The boarding pass comparison. Sloan's 3A against Jalen's 2A, photographed and authenticated. The timeline of the contract termination. Board minutes from 6 days prior. Compliance reports from 3 months prior. The 2 formal written communications to the Whitaker Group that had received technically responsive and substantively meaningless replies. The documentation of the flying privileges suspension, the timestamp, the unusual speed of its execution, the formal record of Rachel's preservation request for United's internal footage, and then the broader pattern, Carlos Reyes' account, recorded by phone and transcribed with his signed authorization. Eleanor Marsh's situation laid out in careful, factual language that stopped short of the NDA's specific terms, but documented the timeline, the financial transactions, the withdrawal of the complaint, all of which were public record, none of which required Eleanor to say a single word that violated the document she'd signed. Rachel's London contact had been precise about what was usable and what wasn't, and what was usable was enough. 47 pages, every claim documented. Every document authenticated, every pattern mapped to its specific factual instances. Jalen read it from beginning to end, not quickly, not skimming. He read it the way his father had taught him to read a contract, every word, every comma, because the things people put in documents tell you who they are when they think no one is watching, and the things they leave out tell you what they're afraid of. When he finished, he called Rachel. She answered in one ring, which meant she had also been awake since before 6. "It's clean," he said. "It's clean," she confirmed. 9 a.m. "I'll be in the office. Marcus has the communications team ready. We're releasing to 7 outlets simultaneously: Tribune, Post, Times, WSJ, and 3 digital outlets that have the reach for this specific story. Simone Park at the Tribune gets an exclusive 30-minute head start because she did the right thing with the initial piece, and that matters." "Agreed," Jalen said. "What about the United footage? We still don't have it." "We don't have it yet," Rachel said. "But here's what we have. The documented preservation request, time-stamped, with United's acknowledgement of receipt. We have the formal request in the package. And we have a source inside United's operations, not someone I can name, not someone who goes on record, who has confirmed to me that the internal cameras in the first-class cabin were operational during the entire flight and that the footage is intact." She paused. "We don't need it for the initial release. The 3 passenger videos are sufficient. The United footage becomes relevant in the next phase, the regulatory inquiry, the formal review, and we'll get it." "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she said. "Because United's general counsel called my office at 7:30 last night. They're distancing themselves from the complaint and the suspension. The speed of that suspension. They know it's a problem. Someone made a call they shouldn't have made, and now the airline is looking at its own exposure. They're not going to fight the footage request. They're going to cooperate because cooperating is the only version of this where they come out with any institutional dignity intact." Jalen looked out the window. The fog was thick this morning, a solid gray wall that erased the bay entirely, the city existing only from the mid-levels up, the lower world gone white and quiet. 9 a.m., he said. 9 a.m., Rachel said. "Go eat something. Actually eat it this time." He almost smiled. "Marcus told you." Marcus tells me everything that's relevant to your functioning," she said. "Eat breakfast, Jalen." The release went out at 9:03 a.m. Not a press release, not a statement. A full structured documentation package. The 47 pages, reduced to a 22-page public version that contained every essential fact and every authenticated piece of evidence, accompanied by a cover letter signed by Rachel Nguyen, General Counsel, Crossgate Innovations, that was 6 paragraphs long and said everything it needed to say without a single word of editorializing. The videos went out simultaneously on Crossgate's official social channels, all 3, unedited, with timestamps visible and an authentication report linked in the post caption. The caption itself was 4 sentences. On November 14th, Mr. Jalen Cross was removed from his confirmed seat on United Flight 447 and publicly humiliated. A subsequent complaint filed against him was without factual basis. The following documentation represents the complete authenticated record of what occurred. We ask only that people watch and read and form their own judgment. By 9:45 a.m., Simone Park's full piece was live on the Tribune's website. She had done what Rachel had known she would do: read the documentation carefully, verified what could be independently verified, and written a piece that was factual, thorough, and devastating in the way that only the plainest truth can be devastating. She had reached the Whitaker Group for comment the previous afternoon. Their response, published in the piece, was a single sentence from a spokesperson. The Whitaker Group does not comment on private matters involving family members. That non-answer, set against 47 pages of documentation, was its own kind of testimony. By 10:30 a.m., 4 national news networks had picked up the story. By 11, it was the top trending topic in business news on every major platform. By noon, the edited clip, the aggressive executive framing, the one that had been at 340,000 views when Jalen had landed, had been almost entirely displaced in the search results by the full footage and the Tribune piece, the way a small boat gets displaced by something with actual mass. Marcus sent a running update every 30 minutes, which Jalen read from the Crossgate San Francisco office where he had the board meeting's second session, the Q4 strategy discussion they'd deferred from the previous day, the work that had to continue because the company did not stop for the noise around it. 10:47 a.m. Full video at 1.2 million views across all platforms. Edited version engagement down 78% in last 2 hours. Tribune piece at 340,000 reads, 11:15 a.m. United Continental's communications team has issued a statement. We take all reports of discriminatory conduct in our cabins with the utmost seriousness. We are conducting a full review of the incident on November 14th and of the subsequent account actions taken. We have reached out directly to Mr. Cross's legal representative. They're folding, 11:52 a.m. 2 investors in the Whitaker Group's primary real estate fund have issued statements indicating they are reviewing their positions. Combined exposure approximately $340 million. 12:18 p.m. Harlan Whitaker's name is now appearing in coverage. The pattern documentation, Reyes Marsh, is getting its own thread. Multiple journalists are pulling the public records independently. 12:44 p.m. Crossgate stock up 3.1% on midday trading, 7 partner inquiries since this morning. The narrative has flipped. Jalen read each update and set his phone face down and returned to the board meeting because the board meeting was what required his attention and because the world operating as it should was not something that required him to watch it. He had built the structure. The structure was holding. The rest was the work. The board session ran until 2 p.m. Afterward, when the room had cleared and Marcus was gathering his materials and the other board members were filing toward the elevator, James Chen lingered. He was a man who lingered deliberately, who used the space after official proceedings to say the things that didn't belong in official proceedings. He stood beside Jalen at the window. The fog had lifted fully now, the bay visible in silver in the early afternoon light, the bridges their proper scale and distance. "I want to say something," Chen said, "that has nothing to do with stock price or partner engagement or any of the things we spent this morning discussing." Jalen looked at him. "What you did," Chen said carefully, "the way you handled this, not just the legal strategy, the documentation, all of that. I mean the way you handled it on the plane, staying steady, not giving them anything, building the record before you did anything else." He paused. "I've been in business for 35 years. I've seen people with considerably more experience and considerably more resources than you had yesterday morning lose themselves in a moment like that. Say something they regretted. React in a way that handed the other side exactly what they needed. He looked out at the bay. You didn't. I've had practice, Jalen said, and he meant it without bitterness. The way you mean a true thing that is also a hard thing, the two qualities coexisting in the same space without canceling each other out. Chen nodded slowly. The company is in good hands, he said. I want you to know I believe that. Not because of the stock performance, though I appreciate the stock performance. Because of what I've seen from you this week. He extended his hand. Jalen shook it. After Chen left, Marcus came to stand beside him. No briefing, no update, just standing there for a moment in the way that old collaborators stand together when the work is mostly done. You should call Maya, Marcus said. I was planning to, Jalen said. I know, Marcus said. I'm just saying it out loud because sometimes it helps to have someone say the obvious thing. Jalen looked at him. Go home, Marcus. In a bit, Marcus said, completely unbothered. In a bit. The call with Maya lasted 42 minutes, which was 42 minutes longer than Jalen had intended when he sat down on the edge of the hotel bed at 3 p.m. and dialed his daughter's number. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been near her phone, which meant she had been waiting. Dad. Her voice had the particular quality it got when she was trying to sound casual and wasn't quite managing it. 8 years old and already working on composure. He felt something enormous in his chest. Hey, Bug, he said. How's school? Dad, dismissively. Mom showed me the news thing. Are you okay? I'm okay, he said. I promise. Did that lady really sit in your seat and say that to you? She did, he said. He didn't soften it. He had made a decision years ago that he would not soften true things for Maya. Not harshly, not graphically, but truthfully, because she was going to grow up in a world where the true things would not soften themselves for her, and the kindest thing he could do was make sure she understood how to look at them without flinching. That was mean, Maya said, and then after a brief pause, in a different register, more considered, the way she got when she was working something out. Were you scared? He thought about this. He gave it the consideration it deserved. A little, he said, not of her, of the situation, of what it could turn into if I wasn't careful. But you were careful. I was very careful, he said. So what happened to her? Maya asked. Is she in trouble? The truth is public now, Jalen said. The whole truth, everything that happened, it's out there for everyone to see. And the people whose job it is to decide what happens next, they'll do their jobs. But you didn't get to yell at her, Maya said, and there was something in her voice that was 8 years old and completely genuine. The specific disappointment of someone who had constructed a satisfying ending and found that the actual ending was more complicated. Jalen laughed. He hadn't laughed since Tuesday morning, and the sound of it surprised him slightly. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar after a long stretch of precision. No, he said. I didn't yell. Was that hard? Little bit, he admitted. I would have yelled, Maya said definitively. I know, he said. That's something we can work on. Dad? Maya. A pause. I told my friend Jasmine about it. She said her mom said you were brave. Tell Jasmine's mom I said thank you, he said. She also said her mom said you were really handsome in the news videos. Tell Jasmine's mom I said thank you for that too. Maya giggled, the specific, unguarded giggle that she was starting to deploy less often as she got older and more self-possessed, and which he treasured every time it appeared because he knew it was on loan, that it would eventually retire itself the way childhood things did, and he wanted to remember the exact sound of it. Sunday, he said. I'll be there Sunday morning. We can make the French toast. The good kind, Maya said, with the cinnamon. The good kind, he confirmed. After they hung up, he sat for a long time in the hotel room, not doing anything, not reviewing anything, just sitting. The fog had come back. The city outside the window was quiet in the way cities are quiet in the middle of the afternoon when most of the living happens indoors. He thought about nothing in particular and everything in general and let himself exist for a little while without the precision that had been carrying him for the past 2 days. The consequences arrived in pieces, the way consequences always do, not in the single clean wave that stories prefer, but in a series of developments that built on each other over the days and weeks that followed, each one its own specific weight. United Continental's formal apology came first. 3 days after the release, the airline's CEO, not a spokesperson, the CEO himself, in a recorded statement posted to the airline's official channels, issued a direct, unequivocal apology to Jalen Cross for the incident on November 14th and for the subsequent account suspension, which was reversed immediately. The statement acknowledged that the suspension had been processed on an irregular timeline and announced an internal investigation into the circumstances of that processing. It announced a comprehensive review of the airline's discrimination complaint protocols, the formation of an independent oversight panel, and a new mandatory training program for all crew and operations staff developed in consultation with civil rights organizations. It was, Rachel told Jalen when she forwarded the statement, considerably more than she had expected from a major carrier under pressure. It was, she said, the statement of an institution that had looked at its own exposure and decided that full accountability was cheaper than partial accountability, which was not the noblest motivation, but produced real outcomes. She had framed the receipt of it simply as a win. The regulatory response took longer, as regulatory responses do. They move with the gravity of large institutions, slowly and with enormous momentum. The Department of Transportation opened a preliminary inquiry into the incident and into the broader pattern documentation 3 weeks after the release. The inquiry was not, the DOT's statement was careful to note, limited to the specific flight. It encompassed the documented pattern of complaint withdrawal facilitated by financial pressure. Eleanor Marsh's situation, the Carlos Reyes situation, both were formally referenced in the inquiry's scope. Jalen was not a party to the regulatory inquiry. He had provided his documentation and his testimony through Rachel and had stepped back to let the process proceed. That was how it was supposed to work. You built the record, you handed it to the people whose job it was to act on it, and you trusted that the structure would do what structures built for that purpose were supposed to do. He had learned over 8 years of building a company inside systems that weren't always friendly to him that this trust was not naive. It was strategic. It was the result of understanding that some work you did yourself and some work you set in motion and stepped away from. The Whitaker Group's investors moved quickly, much more quickly than the regulators, because investors always do, us. By the end of the first week after the release, 6 institutional investors had publicly disclosed that they were reviewing their positions in the group's funds. By the end of the second week, 3 had announced full exits. The combined financial impact was, according to a Bloomberg analysis that Marcus forwarded with a brief, characteristically understated note, for your awareness, in excess of $800 million in assets under management. Harlan Whitaker issued a statement through his own attorney that was 3 sentences long and said nothing substantive, which was itself, in the context of everything else, a kind of admission. Sloan Whitaker said nothing publicly. She retained a crisis communications firm, the kind of firm that handled situations where the public record was immovable and the only question was how to position the person attached to it for whatever came next. Jalen did not know what they were telling her. He thought, sometimes, about the end of their phone call, the exhale, the bare voice, the single sentence that had sounded almost like the beginning of understanding, and he hoped that whatever happened to her from here included some genuine reckoning, not punishment for its own sake, not the particular cruelty of watching someone collapse, just a confrontation with the truth about herself that was real enough, sustained enough, that it changed something. He could not know if that would happen. He did not expect to know. Carlos Reyes gave a brief interview to the Chicago Tribune 2 weeks after the release. He was measured and specific. He described what had happened in 2022 in the language of a man who had held the memory carefully for 3 years and was now, for the first time, setting it down in a place where it could be seen. He said near the end of the interview that he had decided to speak because the story Jalen Cross had made public had created a space in which his own story could exist. He said he wasn't angry, exactly. He said he was relieved. Jalen read the interview in his Chicago apartment on a Saturday morning at the kitchen table, with coffee and the particular November light coming through the window. He read Reyes's last paragraph 3 times. Then he set his phone down and sat for a while with the feeling of it. The understanding that the thing he had refused to make quiet had made space for someone else's truth to exist. That feeling was not triumph. It was something deeper than triumph and less loud. It was the feeling of a thing being right. Checked. On the Sunday morning that followed the Friday release, 3 days after the documentation went out, 5 days after the flight, Jalen drove to Diane's apartment in Hyde Park to pick up Maya. The exchange happened in Diane's living room, which was warm and smelled like coffee, and the candle she'd been burning since they were married and had apparently kept burning through everything that had come after. Maya had her backpack already on, her coat zipped, her braids fresh and neat, a small stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm that she'd had since she was 4 and still traveled with, though she no longer acknowledged its presence in front of her school friends. "Ready?" Jalen said. "I've been ready," Maya said, with the patient exasperation of someone who had been waiting for this. Diane walked them to the door. At the threshold, in the brief conversational space that existed between one part of things and another, she looked at Jalen with an expression he recognized from their life together. The look she had when she was going to say something direct and had decided to say it without preamble. "The story is everywhere," she said. "People keep sending me the videos, people I haven't talked to in years." She paused. "I wanted to say, I think you did the right thing, the whole time. I don't say that often enough about things that matter." Jalen looked at her. "Thank you, Diane." She nodded once, then to Maya. "Be good." "Mom," Maya said, with the infinite tolerance of an 8-year-old being told the obvious. They drove back to Jalen's apartment in Wicker Park, with the radio on low and Maya narrating the week's events from school with the comprehensive energy of someone who had been waiting all week for a proper audience. There was a conflict with a girl named Haley that had apparently been resolved through the mediation of a third party named Bree. There was a science project about water cycles that Maya had opinions about. There was a development in the cafeteria involving chocolate milk that she described with the dramatic precision of a born storyteller. Jalen listened to all of it. He asked the right questions. He laughed in the right places. He was fully present in the way that he was only fully present with her. The absence of calculation, of strategy, of the constant low-level management that running a company and managing a public situation required. In the car with Maya, he was just her father. It was the easiest thing he knew how to be. They made French toast, the good kind, with cinnamon and a little vanilla in the egg mixture, the way his mother had taught him and he had taught Maya. Maya stood on the step stool she'd long outgrown, but still used at the counter beside him, responsible for the cinnamon distribution, which she took seriously. "How much?" she said, shaker poised. "How much do you think?" he said. She considered this with genuine gravity. "A lot," she decided. "A lot," he agreed. They ate at the kitchen table, the morning light coming through the window at its low November angle, the city quiet outside, the apartment warm. Maya read her book between bites. Jalen drank his coffee and read nothing and looked at her and felt, in the deep and ordinary way that was the truest thing he knew, that this was the reason for all of it. Not the company, not the stock price, not the documentation or the regulatory inquiry or the $800 million in Whitaker Group outflows. Those were outcomes. They mattered, but they were not the reason. The reason was this table, this light, this child who was going to grow up in a world that he intended, by every means available to him, to make fractionally more honest than he'd found it. After breakfast, while Maya was in her room reading, Jalen sat at the kitchen table with his phone and opened an email he had been drafting in pieces over the past 3 days. It was addressed to Carrie Delgado, the flight attendant who had confirmed his manifest, who had submitted the written account, who had told him that she was just doing her job and had been wrong about that in the best possible way. He had gotten her contact information through Rachel, who had gotten it through the airline's formal review process with Carrie's consent. The email was not long. It said that her documentation had mattered. It said that the written account she had submitted, time-stamped and formal and carefully detailed, had been a piece of the foundation that everything else was built on. It said that the thing she had done, the decision to put her name on the record when she could have stayed neutral, when neutral would have been easier and safer and professionally defensible, was the kind of thing that changed outcomes for people. It said thank you, without equivocation, without the formal language of legal gratitude or corporate acknowledgement, just the plain thing that he meant. He read it once. He sent it. Then he put his phone face down on the table, the way he did when he was done with the work for the day, and he listened to the apartment around him. Maya's music from her room, low and tinny through her small speaker, a car passing outside, the radiator beginning its afternoon conversation with itself. And he let the world be, for a little while, exactly what it was. On Tuesday of the following week, Jalen Cross boarded a United flight from O'Hare to New York. The apology had been issued. The ban had been reversed. He had a meeting with a prospective enterprise client in Midtown, a routine board dinner that evening, a return flight the following morning. He walked through the jet bridge into the first-class cabin, briefcase in hand, the charcoal suit, the same one, cleaned and pressed again, because he liked this suit and because there was something in wearing it that he had decided was not superstition but intention. He stopped at 2A. The seat was empty. He put his briefcase in the overhead bin, carefully, with the ease of a man who had done this 10,000 times and intended to do it 10,000 more. He sat down. He buckled his seatbelt. He adjusted the window shade to the angle he preferred, not fully open, not closed, the specific middle position that gave you sky without glare. He looked out at the O'Hare tarmac, the same gray expanse, the same ground crews in their orange vests, the same geometry of runways extending toward a horizon that was low and flat and thoroughly ordinary. He thought about his daughter. He thought about French toast. He thought about Carlos Reyes, who was relieved. He thought about Carrie Delgado, who had put her name on the record. He thought about Daniel Osei in 4A, who had understood that you paid forward the things that had been given to you when you needed them. He thought about what it meant to build something precise enough that the truth could stand on it. He thought about his father in a Bronzeville apartment over a late dinner, saying, not just harder, precise. Build something that's so precisely true that there's no angle of attack on it. He took out his legal pad. He uncapped his pen. The engines began to build. He thought about the world his daughter was going to inherit and the small, exact, irreversible contribution he had made to its honesty this week. And he felt something that lived below the chest, below language, in the part of a person that is simply alive and knows it. The plane began to move. He pressed his pen to paper. He had work to do. And the wheels lifted from the ground, and the city fell away beneath him, and the clouds opened above, and Jalen Cross rose into the clear and carried everything forward. The truth, the record, the name on the manifest, the seat that had always been his. And he did not look back.